Hi, it's Jamie. If you've ever been curious about English paper piecing in 3 dimension like this is what I'll be talking about in the video today. The pattern here is Ophelia by Cake&Ale, and I have made a couple other of her patterns before that you may have seen. One of them is Oberon's vase. Some of you may have seen this before in person. I use it to hold my pencil crayons and a bunch of other fun stuff. So this is done using English paper piecing. The papers are still inside and it's all hand stitched with papers that I have hand cut. So if you're curious about 3D English paper piecing and want to know how I made little Ophelia here, stay tuned. The first thing we need is paper. So this paper that I have here is 110 pound or 300 grams per meter square cardstock that I purchased from a big box craft store. It is a little different than the traditional English paper piecing paper because the paper that we use for 2D English paper piecing is quite thin, whereas this stuff is quite sturdy. And the reason we want it to be sturdy is because we want our 3D pieces to have shape and hold its structure. And this paper makes it a little trickier to sew with, only because it isn't as flexible. But as I said, we don't want it to be super flexible because we want that structure. So what I do is I'm going to take my piece of paper here and I am going to tape it to my cutting surface. I'm just going to move this down a little bit just so it's actually easier for me to work with it as I'm showing you guys here. I'm going to move this down and I just have plain tape. And I want to tape this down really good because I don't want this shifting as I'm cutting. Now you can use scissors if you want to. I just find that my cuts are cleaner when I use my craft knife or my X-Acto knife. That should be good, even though I didn't tape the bottom edge. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my cutting sheets. So the thing that you want to be really cognizant of when you're doing this is these patterns have inner and outer pieces. So I tend to cut one at a time, and then I also have my handy pencil here to mark the templates as I go. This also includes fabric templates, and it says right on here that it does include your seam allowance, and you can use it to mark out 12 for the shape. Let's start with this one. So my cardstock paper and the pattern is on the same size of paper. It's standard 8.5 by 11. I do believe that Cass makes her patterns in A4 as well for those who are on completely metric. So I'm just taping my templates down the same that I taped my cardstock down. I'm just being careful that I don't get any tape on my actual template part. And that should be okay because I'm gonna mostly be pulling towards myself. So that's not going anywhere. Now, very important, that we have a metal ruler. I just have a little 6-inch metal ruler. So I have my metal ruler and my craft knife. So this is a really lovely one from Japan. I think I've shown it before. And I don't think, oh, there we go. So it is called the NT Cutter D400. And you can see the type of blade that is in there. So it is important that we have a metal ruler, because if you're using a plastic ruler, your craft knife is probably going to cut the ruler, the plastic one. And all I do is, let's start over here. Now I'm working with heavier cardstock, so I want to take this slow and steady. So I'm not going to put a lot of pressure on my craft knife as I'm cutting. And my lines are in here, so I'm just going to do a few passes. And pretty much similar pressure with each pass. And you will be able to hear and feel the difference once you get through. So it typically takes me 3 passes. And that's good to go. Now, I will say, cutting your own templates, they're not going to be all perfectly laser aligned as they would be if these were cut by a laser cutter, like the paper pieces, paper shapes are. I have not found that to be an issue with the 2 pieces that I finished. I mean, you want to be careful so that you're not like going off on a tangent when you're cutting these things. But I haven't found that having them not be all perfectly the same size is a huge detriment. And obviously you want a cutting surface under your work as you're doing this. And it's nice to have these with the ruler, because they're lined up here, so I can just do one long straight line. And like working with a rotary cutter, you want to make sure that the blade on your craft knife is nice and sharp. I'm just going to do these, and then I'll pop one out for you to see what it looks like. It's going to be super exciting. I'm just going to try to move this a little closer to me. So I'm just going to go for this one here. I know that instinctually we're not supposed to cut towards ourselves. Craft knives are a little different. Don't be cutting towards yourself with a rotary, please. And as always, be careful of your fingers. Okay, that's that one. And then I know my paper's getting up a little bit here, but that's okay, because I'm just going to place my ruler here, and that's going to hold it down for me. And then I'm going to cut the other side. Same process. 3 to 4 or 5, however many passes it takes. Doing the multiple passes will also help the cardstock just be cut neater. Okay, so I have one that's done. So this is just from the pattern, that's scrap paper recycle now. Then I can just use my blade to carefully pop this up. And if I find there's any corners that aren't done, I can just carefully come in here with my blade. A little bit of added pressure. And there we go. So there's one. And what I will do now is I will mark this as probably just with an eye, just like inner eye on both sides, because you never know. I will do the same for all of these. And then I will do the same for the outers. So I will meet you back when I am done cutting them all out. Okay, I have all of my pieces cut out, and I just want to do sort of a quick, I don't know, why labeling is important. Because yeah, on the face of it, you can tell that these two are slightly different sizes, but these two, it's a little tricky. So one thing that I really like about Cass's patterns is she has figured out how to make the inside just slightly smaller than the outside. And that is what gets you the really nice nesting. So I have all my things in here, of course, but you can see that, you know, they nest nicely together there. And that's what we want. And then same with the interior and outside of these pieces. There isn't a huge difference in size, but it makes a huge difference when we are putting our pieces together. So that little bit of difference is really important. And that's also why labeling our pieces are important, because we want to make sure that our inside is inside and our outside is outside. This is the fabric I'm going to be using for this project. I found these at a charity sale I went to not too long ago. I was looking through the fat quarter bins and I saw these come up and I thought they looked really nice together. So this is going to be my main print on the outside. It's got some pinks and greens and grays. This is going to be the base, so sort of the underside and like the bottom part. And then I think this is going to be the inside. I wanted something lighter for my inside just because I plan to use this as a little thread catcher or like scrap bin thing. And I figured having it with a lighter color on the inside would make that easier to see. So my job now is to glue-based cutout shapes, glue-based my fabric onto the paper shapes as I would any other project, and I'll meet you back when I'm done that. Okay, I am back with all of the flat seams sewn together, and what I mean by flat is that I've just stitched the pieces together into this form, and you might begin to see how this is going to start taking shape, because the next step is I'm going to sew this seam to this seam and then this seam to this seam, etc. This one is a little bit more fun. So again, I have sewn all the flat seams together. And now I'm going to stitch this edge with this edge. And I was thinking about the best way to do this, so I was kind of playing around because this is my outside. And what I could do is sew wrong sides together if I don't want to turn it inside out. Now with these, this is also why glue basting and having a certain weight of paper is important, because I don't know if you could baste these tight enough with thread to sort of survive the turning inside out. Now with the inside, that's not going to be too much of a big deal, because when you're stitching right sides together, this is going to be effectively my inside. I don't have to flip it right side out. However, with the outside, I do, because we're still going to be stitching right sides together, but then we're going to have to kind of like pop it back into the shape that we want, which is, you can't really see, but it'll sort of be like that. So when I was thinking of how I'm going to stitch this, I was kind of playing around with how these work. And so this edge of this diamond needs to wind up here and then this edge needs to go here on this diamond. So if I put them like this, if I just kind of stretch it over a little bit, these two seams line up really well in a flatter fashion. So this is what it looks like. So what I plan to do is I will just do my standard whip stitch along this seam. This diamond is, or triangle is going to be floppy because it's going to attach to the next one over. And then once I get done all these straight seams, I'm going to come in here to this seam here, which might be a little tricky to see. But there's the seam here that I'm just going to do a looser whip stitch kind of over. And then once that's done, it should be pretty straightforward to just hopefully pop these back. But unfortunately for my thread basting friends, if you want to try this, you're more than welcome to try with thread basting, but I do think that glue basting is a little bit more robust and up for the challenge. And I would also say this is where your 50 weight is probably the thinnest thread that you'd want to use. I don't know how well 80 or 100 would really work for this, just because you do need to have a little bit more pliability, a little bit more strength. So when I was stitching these seams, I just did my same old, let's see if it'll focus for me. It's a little tricky to see here too, but I just did my same regular whip stitch. So I knotted at the corner and then I came across and then knotted at the corner. And I will be doing that the same for here as well. And on these ones, it might be a little, you have to kind of bend it a little bit. You don't want to fold your paper because this paper is going to stay in our shape, our little bowl, when we're done. So I will just kind of pinch them. And unfortunately, sew tights they're not really made for this. So I'll just try to line up my edges as best as I can. And then I will just whip stitch along this edge. And I'm going to do the same thing on this seam here, right in here. So once I get all of these larger ones done, I'm just going to do sort of a looser whip stitch over these to close them up. And you don't have to be super like tight with these, I guess. The paper is going to help it hold its form. There's 2 layers of paper that go into these things. And let me just grab my Oberon's vase here. So this is my Oberon's vase that holds, as you can see, all my pencil crayons and other little things. So it is squishy, but firm, and it holds up really well. It's the exact same paper that I have in here. I kind of don't really want to dump everything out, but it's the same paper that I have in here as I do in this bowl. And it holds quite well. Like there's diamond shapes or just triangles here. And then there's a long triangle in here. And it's the same on the inside, which is, you can't really see because I have all my things, but you can kind of see in there. And yeah, I just whip stitch these. So you don't have to be like super hard with your stitching to have it be the form that you want. But as I said, it is paper. It's still it's cardstock, so it is squishy and kind of pliable. So you don't want to be, super like rough with these things. But they are flexible. But as you can see, it still goes back. And if I feel like for whatever reason it's kind of losing its shape, I just kind of give little pinches at the corners. But other than that, I've had this for a few years now, and it's always had my pencil crayons. And, I have my pencil and eraser clipped on the side here, and I've got a couple other things in here. And it sits on my desk, and yeah, it's really nice. And so I'm hoping that this little guy, I don't really have a tiny scrap or like a thread ort jar. So that's what I'm hoping to use this for. And if anyone is curious, my thread, so I've mainly matched the inside with this pink. It is 2425 from Ophelia, and then I use the same pink on the darker. And then for this speckly fabric, I've used a pale green, and it's 5014. And yeah, you can't really, you can see it a little bit, but that's like all EPP. As I said before in some EPP videos, I don't really care if my stitches show. And I believe on Oberon's vase, which is what this one is called, you can see my stitches, but I also used an Aurifil that variegates from black to white. So you will see it on the white. But I'm not really, again, I'm not really not all that fussed about it. And then it looks like I used maybe, oh, I used some kind of red when I was sewing the top part together to just have that blend. So yeah. So I am going to stitch these seams together, and then I will be back for the popping into right side out, and then the assembly of both pieces together. And then our little Ophelia will be done. Yay! So here we are with the two pieces almost done, and I say almost because we'll get into that in a second. So this is my interior piece, and this is my exterior piece. And what I wanted to show is sort of how I stitch these seams. So from the last bit, you remember that I stitched these long ones together, and I wanted to show how I stitch these to kind of just fuse them together in there. So let me get my goodies that I need here. Okay, so what I'm essentially going to be doing is, I guess, just they're still going to be whip stitches, but they're not going to be like these whip stitches. So I'm not going to be trying to press these seams together to have them be flat and then do the whip stitches. So I'm going to start as I normally do with a knot. And this might be a little tricky to get in here. And of course I'm holding this a little further away than I typically do so you guys can see. Okay, so I got my thread through, and just got a little bit of fabric bit in there. I'll speed this up if this gets too arduous, but same loop knot method, and I'm going to do that twice to really anchor my thread in here. Okay. And now all I'm really going to do, and I'm still going to do my angled whip stitch. You can do perpendicular if you prefer. So I'm just going to take some thread from the one side, or sorry, some fabric from the one side, and then fabric from the other. And this might be a little tricky because of course your paper is in here too. There we go. So you can hopefully see kind of what I've taken there. And I'm going to push through and pull, and then I'm going slow because I want to get my thread tail in this loop if possible. Get that in there. And I'm going to pull. And I'm going to pull kind of tight, but not super tight. And then we're just going to do that all the way up. And this might take a little bit of finesse. I do have my finger like right against the seam that I'm working on, just to not only, I guess, keep it in the position that I want, but to have something that I can push against as well to get where I need to go. And I'm really just trying to get a little bit of that fabric. There we go. You can see again the little bite that I took. And then I'm pulling decently tight, because of course these are the sort of the structural corners of your piece. And now it's a little crazy with all these little dog ears in here, but I'm gonna do the entire seam this way. And I'm not too concerned about my stitch spacing. I don't want to be too far away, but I also don't want to, I don't feel I need to be really close either. There we go, that should be okay. And I will talk about, so once I've finished doing all these, I'm gonna do what I did on the rest of the little dog ears, and that is to just glue them down, because you can, you know, I'm pulling them away so I can get to where I want to go, and that might cause a little bit of lifting. This is also why I really don't know if thread basting would work for these projects, just because you are manhandling them pretty good. And at the end for this one, we also have to turn it right side out. So that's why I guess in here, and for most of these seams, you don't, I did go fairly tight, so I guess we'll see if that's going to be kind of a problem. Maybe with these ones you don't have to go super tight, but I'm also not directly on the seam edge either. I'm just sort of going over the opening and bringing it closed. Trying to stay in focus. Now that's the struggle. And I think we're pretty much at the end. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna do my last one, and I am gonna try to get into the corner, like right in here, and then the corner on the other one. And then we're gonna do the loop knot. So I like to do just one to really kind of secure it, one stitch, and then I'm gonna do the double loop. And I am trying to not sew into the dog ear too much, but if it happens, it's not a huge deal on these pieces. There's one. And it's a little tough to film these sometimes because I'm sure with you guys too, you're used to holding it right in front of your face. So when it's out at a distance trying to film, it's a little tricky. All right, so there's two. I'm gonna cut my thread. And so now we have this seam done, and it's there, whereas these ones are all still not attached. So what I will do, I'm gonna go do all of these little guys, and then I guess I'll show you how I glue down. It's really not all that tricky. Basically what I do, and you can see on these ones, and then also on these ones, is I'll basically just take my glue stick and I'll just put a little bit of glue on the ear, like here, and then I glue that down, fold it over, and then I'll put glue on here, the little bits that lift it off, and then I'll fold that over nicely to get a little overlap. And then I'll do the same for these triangle pieces up here. I'll put some glue on here and then just kind of fold it down nice, and then same on the other side. So then it should kind of look like this. And basically what also that does is it'll kind of just reinforce these corners, which is good because when we're popping this out, we want it to be sturdy. And yeah, all right, I'm gonna go do the rest of these little seams and then we'll be back. Okay, we are back with all of our little side seams stitched and also glued down. I am going to keep my glue pen handy just in case something might need to be tacked down a little bit more again. But now we have the fun part of turning this guy right side out. So I'm just gonna, I think, just carefully kind of push on these corners here. This is sort of the scary part because don't obviously want to break your lovely bowl that you spent time on. But now this is where if you don't want to do this part, you can stitch the outside pieces wrong sides together. And again, this is also where using heavier paper would probably make this a little bit more complicated, because anything I think heavier than what I'm using now would make this a lot harder, I think. So I am just really trying to carefully sort of coax these pieces to kind of fold in on themselves here. And again, this is where your 50 weight thread is going to be pretty important. As I said in a previous segment, I wouldn't go anything thinner than 50 weight just because I don't know how durable like an 80 weight or 100 weight would be. Polyester you might be okay with, but I use cotton, so I'm really not going to be messing with it too much. We'll just try to... This looks crazy. Let's try to coax this out here. So your paper does get a little bent up. But it'll be okay once we get to the other side here. Just really trying to get this bit out. Okay, here we go. We're on the other side. We're getting there now. Okay, there we go. We are right side out. Woohoo! Everything looks pretty good. I'm just gonna kind of gently push on my corners here. And that's why I kept my glue handy. Well, it's not a huge deal, especially on this outer edge. I just want to have everything sort of pinned down nicely. Okay, so now this also looks a little wonky. This is, and you know, this is what's going inside here. So how is that gonna work? So now what we're gonna do is we just stick our inside into the outside. And this is why I really like Cake and Ale's patterns, because they are designed to nest. So I have made projects before where you're just using the same size paper as the inside and the outside. And what happens there is they don't nest. You get a sort of a little ridge. I'm just making sure I have my hexagon lined up pretty well. So that looks pretty decent to me. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of make sure that my inside corners are matching up to the outside corners pretty okay. And this is where the stitching on the rim is going to come into play as well. So the last step, so I know that this is not finished clearly, but you get a good idea of what it's going to look like. And now we're going to stitch along the edge and just really tidy things up here, because this is where our shape is going to come in. So I'm going to use the green thread that I was using. I'm going to cut a decent length of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in just this corner here, just because it's the one that's there. And I am going to, I think it's going to be easier for me to go this way, just with how I have these triangles folded. I think. This one got done the opposite way. So I'm just going to try to fix that here. So this is what I mean by just sort of gluing down my dog ears. And just make sure they're nice and firm in there. And so now they're all going the same way around. So I have this corner folded under this corner. I don't know if it really makes much of a difference, but I feel like it will for my sewing this together at the end. So what I think I'm gonna do is I essentially want each corner to match up. So I want this face to match with this in here as much as possible. There we go. I feel like going this way is going to be easier. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go in here. And this is also where basting can make a difference. So if I had thought about it a little bit more, I would have basted. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna do that right now. So I would have basted to have the top flip over my sides, if that makes sense. And I think I should still be able to do that. So I'm gonna do that on all these because I think it'll just make a more flush edge on here. Where's my little doohickey? So this is why basting order can be kind of important depending on what you're doing with English paper piecing. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna do this and then I'll meet you back once I've done this. Okay, now they're all basted how I want them to be basted, and I know you're probably looking at this and thinking it's not super great, but don't you worry. Most of this is going to be hidden by the other bits of our beautiful sewing. It's all going to be tucked in there anyway, and you're not going to be able to see it. It just gives a nice, cleaner edge to our bowl. Okay, so take two. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through pink the inside first, because I want my tail to be tucked on the inside, I think. And if you're worried about, I guess, this holding or maybe not being, oops, as tight as you want it to be, you can always do 2 loops. Or you could use a heavier thread if you wanted on your outer rim. There's lots of options out there. Dang it, my tail keeps, oh no, I have my tail still. Okay, there we go. So I'm gonna pull kind of loose on that one. And then I'm gonna pull tighter on the second one. And then get that tail, and then I want to pull the tail just to really make sure that that's secure. All right, and now I'm gonna tuck my thread tail in here. Kind of just make sure that my fabric looks good. And we're gonna whip stitch all the way around the perimeter. Oops, hitting my lamp. And it's just gonna come really nicely together. Ow. And we're going to do the same thing that we do as always with English paper piecing. So when I get to the edge here, I'm going to do another knot. And with this piece, you can use really as many fabrics as you want. I wanted to use the 3 that I showed that I picked up at the charity sale, because I thought they worked well together, and I like the mottled look of this. This is Stonehenge here. Part of me kind of wishes that I took the lighter pink and used it out here in the diamonds, but I think that's okay, and I wanted to have some of the dark come up from the bottom so it could actually, when it's sitting on the table, it wasn't just this here, you could kind of see it in here. That was my thing. And I wanted something lighter for the inside because, I mean, I guess it shows dirt a little easier. You can kind of, there's, you know, cat hair in there. But I figured that if I'm using it as like an ort jar or a little scrap jar, having it be lighter on the inside would just make it easier to see if it's clean or not. I don't know. Or empty. So I will say that these projects, since you are hand cutting your own papers, they are not going to be laser precise as the laser cut paper pieces are. So there is going to be like some slight imperfection, but I mean, you're going to get that with any hand sewn project anyway. And I think that's just part of the charm. They do come together pretty quickly, depending on which that you're doing, obviously. Like, I would say that, you know, at the most, it would really be about a week or something like that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of do a few like stitches to kind of take me to the corner here, if that makes sense. Really kind of, so I think I'm going to do a knot here. And do another one. I really am just trying to kind of guide it into the corner. And you saw how squishy they can be, so you can still kind of manipulate it after the fact. So that's what I'm gonna do all the way around, and it is kind of like lifting a little bit because it's, I don't know, it just pushes its way, but you can just kind of just like ease it back into where you want it to be. And once things kind of get sewn together and settle, then I don't know, it just looks different. It looks finished. So I'm gonna actually kind of pull that a little bit maybe. And this is where Wonder Clips can be helpful. So I'm gonna take this corner here. I'm just gonna have a long stitch hang out there. And then I'm gonna do my double knot. And I'm pulling decently tight on these knots, but you want to be careful with your thread because, as I said, I'm using cotton, so it is a little bit more susceptible to wear and tear, I guess. And I lost my loop in here somewhere. Oh well, we'll just go through both threads, it'll be fine. So you can be a little bit more rough if you are using polyester. And I mean, on the outside edge, you don't have to have your stitches be like super close together. You just want to fuse things together so they just, I don't know, you have your inside and your outside together. I would say that I typically will do the same amount of stitches per inch on the outside, maybe a little less, maybe just like a little bit looser. And I mean, these things they're squishy and they're durable, but they're not toys, you know what I mean? So while you want to be, what am I trying to say? Like, you want them to hold up and do what you've made them to do, but they're not, I mean, they're not plastic containers. They're not glass, obviously. Like, it's paper and fabric and thread. All right, we are in the home stretch. Now I know this looks a little wonky, but that's okay. It'll come together. And this is just sort of the nature of handmade and the nature of not having 100% super precise pieces. Yeah, I'm really happy with this little guy. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna do these final stitches and my thread broke, but perfect opportunity here. So my thread broke in the middle of what I was doing, So actually what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna get a new piece. Now, that's just what happens when you're going over card. It shears the thread and, you know, it gets weaker over time. So to combat that, you can use smaller pieces. So instead of doing the entire perimeter with one piece of thread, you could do just a little bit. So actually what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come back this way and I'm gonna do how I started. And I'm gonna hopefully be able to bury my tail in there. So just gonna add a knot, double knot. Again, you probably wouldn't have that issue with polyester, but I like cotton more. So I'm going to take my doodad, and I'm just going to try to tuck my thread tail inside. And then I'm going to really try to anchor this last, oops, didn't get it tucked in there. Actually what I want to do, just give it a little pull to make sure it's really secure. Okay, good enough. And then I'm just gonna do some fairly firm stitches in here because I want to close this gap. So your piece is probably going to shift a little bit as you're going around. It happens. Try not to sweat it too much. And then I think what I'm going to do, there's also a lot of layers of fabric sort of in this spot because this is where we folded over the seam allowances on the triangles, and there's seams on the squares on the inside pieces. So I'm just gonna really get in there, make that nice and firm. That looks pretty good. And then I think my thread broke somewhere in here, so I'm just gonna go back over a little tiny bit. And then we can do a little knot. And it's not like we're really gonna be throwing these around like baseballs or anything like that, so I'm not too worried about the thread coming out. And if it does, then we can always just sew it closed later. That should be good. I'll knot this up. Looks good. I'll just cut my tail. And there we go. We have our little bowl. That's little tails, so it'll be fine. So Ophelia is done. And now what I kind of like to do is I will just sort of squish on the points to really get them to be how I want them to be. And like these diamonds and things are not flush to the inside, right? So you're gonna get a little, like you want that texture, sort of that faceted texture. So I like to squish and I'll gently pinch each corner to really kind of get that definition. Or you can, you know, squeeze. That looks really good. I'm really happy with my little, yeah, so there is Ophelia. And this is probably just gonna sit nicely on my desk and hold, you know, little scraps and little pieces that I can put in there as I work.